He's throwing into the end zone. Leaping catch, Colston.
This guy's a banger. He's a collision player, tough as a $2 steak. That damn Marques Colston is another reason that I'm out of coaching now.
All right, we are back for another episode of Under the Number. Today we have a very special guest. We've got Marques Colston, the all-time New Orleans Saints leading receiver. He played with the team for 10 years. He won Super Bowl 44, an absolute New Orleans legend. He is now a founding partner at Champion Venture Partners, a diversified holding company specializing in investing across the sports value chain. One of my favorite players to watch growing up. So such a pleasure to have Marques join the show and take time out of his day. So thanks so much for jumping on.
I appreciate you having me on today.
So, anyone who looks you up now, you'll see Champion Venture Partners, CVP, in the news. This is a relatively recent development, though, and you retired almost a decade ago. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about between that retirement and today. What did you spend? Were you kind of out in the wild figuring out what you wanted to do next, or what were those years like post NFL and pre, significant business venture?
Yeah, man, I appreciate you asking that. It's been a journey for me. A lot of different stops over the last, I'll call it 15 years, because my post-football journey started when I was still playing. But yeah, a bunch of different stops, different industries, different roles, positions. And, in hindsight, I've kind of prototyped my way to where I'm at now. So I initially got started as an angel investor, probably my third or fourth year in the league. Invested in, tech and the intersection of sports and tech. And I initially got started just because that's what all my peers were doing at the time. So I felt like I should be doing it too. But once I got in and I could kind of feel my way through it and really resonate with the entrepreneur's journey, I could kind of map it to my journey, opened up the world in a completely different way for me. And that's when I kind of gained the confidence to be able to move around. And from there, I went into team ownership in the indoor and arena football league. I stayed there for about 7 years. Have done value add investing as an individual investor. So I'll invest in a company and then join the management team. I've done that at about 3 or 4 different companies. One in cannabis, one in health and wellness. I've done some consulting work, whether it be at healthcare companies, sports tech companies. So I've been in a bunch of different places the last 15 years. And what's interesting is at the time, there wasn't really a compass or a through line. I was just kind of, letting each opportunity lead me to the next. But as I sit here at CVP now, in hindsight, each one of those different steps, as random as they seemed at the time, kind of gave me the skill sets that I could stack together to be able to launch CVP, which is the firm that we're running and scaling up now.
You talked about the entrepreneur's journey kind of resonating with you. I can see how. You played college football at Hofstra University that no longer has a football program. You were drafted in the 7th round. Just in preparing for this episode, I saw that your first deal in the NFL was 3 years, $1.1 million, which I think the league minimum is for 1 year is nearly $1.1 million these days. Talk a little bit about whether it was even getting recruited to Hofstra in the first place and then breaking into this locker room from what really was just a no-name school surrounded by all these stars. What was that whole journey like? I mean, that's an uphill battle from the beginning.
Yeah, definitely a journey. And money-wise, different time and different place, man. But yeah, that's kind of been the story of my journey in a lot of different ways. It's I'm kind of stepping into spaces that I'm not supposed to be. So as you mentioned, I was under recruited out of high school, probably rightly recruited out of high school. I was, 6'4", 175-pound guy running a 4.8. That's probably how you end up at Hofstra with not a ton of offers. But when I stepped on campus there, just stepped on with this vision in mind that I wanted to become, and I wanted to make myself into an NFL football player. So from 175 pounds to 210 as a sophomore to 240 as a junior, then I had to scale it back a little bit as a senior. Each step in the journey, I just kind of got really comfortable with the journey of becoming. And that's what led me through my college career, not really caring about what the outside world said. I had my vision, I had my goals in place, and I was working towards them. And, when I got that call at the end of the seventh round to go to the Saints, it felt like deja vu, right? It was another situation where I was stepping in a place where I thought that I deserved to, and I thought that I put together a body of work that was better than a seventh round pick. But at the end of the day, it's just an opportunity. It's a door being open. So I got that call a little bit later than I thought I would, but you step into the locker room, and it's one of those places where performance speaks. And that's always been my MO. I'm not going to say a lot. I'm just going to show up. I'm going to perform. I'm going to perform consistently, and I'll let that do the talking for me. And doing that as a rookie, and just kind of learning how to become a pro in that first off season, leading up into training camp. By the time I got to training camp, I was in great shape physically, mentally, and ready to compete. And once I got those opportunities, I just tried to maximize each one, and found myself on the field as a starter on day one, and really never looked back.
And as if you needed another obstacle at that time, you were joining the New Orleans Saints right after Katrina. New coach, new quarterback, Superdome is in disrepair. Tell me a little bit about that time frame and just what that was like joining, starting your NFL career. It's already so new and so many things coming at you, and then you add on the most insane layer of difficulty joining the city at that time. What was it like?
It was a weird time for me personally, just because I was just so laser focused on being right. I was just laser focused on making a roster, and then laser focused on taking advantage of the opportunity. But at the same time, you're seeing everything that's happening around you, and you can't help but to pay attention to what's going on, and pay attention to what that team represented and what that meant to the city and the region at that moment in time. So it's one of those things where as a rookie, as a young player, you're trying to be focused, but at the same time you have this constant perspective reset going on around you, which inadvertently kind of kept me grounded and kept me in a place where I understood that, as important as this job and this role was to me, it was still a role or a job in a region that was kind of trying to find its footing. So that yin and yang, mentally, was just kind of interesting to navigate. And when we were able to get back into the dome, for that first game against the Falcons to reopen the dome, that was the first time that I really understood the breadth of what we were doing. And to feel that as a 23-year-old in your first ever home game, you kind of get chills just thinking about it. And that's a moment in time that NFC Championship, Super Bowl, like you can't replace that moment just because of what it meant emotionally to people. And just to be a part of something like that, really to kick off the season in a lot of ways, that's a hell of a way to kick off a career.
No doubt. I mean, you mentioned a couple of serious high points there between the legendary Falcons home opener post Katrina. I mean, a lot of family members were at that game. I've heard that is the loudest environment they've ever experienced by a long shot.
Yeah.
The NFC Championship game against Chicago, and after that amazing run, coming out right off the bat there, of course, the Super Bowl 44. What are some of your fondest memories during your decade with the Saints?
I think you just hit all of them, man. Like that dome reopening game is always going to be, if not the top of the list, it's either 1A or 1B, just because of what it meant beyond football. Obviously, the chance to win a Super Bowl in year 4 for me, and then spend the next 6 years not being able to sniff it again. That gets increasingly important as time goes on, just because you realize how rare it is and how hard it is to get one of those. But beyond that, it's just it felt like every one of those home games in that 10-year span was a party. And just the ability to show up and perform, and just kind of put on for that city that really loved and embraced us as the way that they did. It was just a special 10 years, and felt like it caught lightning in a bottle for 10 years, man, and that's hard to do.
What were some of your most meaningful relationships that you built within that Saints organization?
Yeah, I mean, you build a lot of relationships. Obviously the draft class that I came in with, still speaks to those guys. That '06 class, which I'll include Drew in there just because he came in the same year as a free agent.
Yeah.
you realize that you're coming together with people that had a vision, but still probably weren't sure that it was going to work out the same way you were, right? So there's always going to be that connection with those guys, the Lance Moores, the Pierre Thomases, obviously my receiver crew, Devery Henderson, Robert Meacham, all of those guys, man. You just build something together over so many years, and it's rare to kind of keep a core group together that way. But even outside the Saints organization, just making and creating relationships in the business community, in the nonprofit world. Um, there's a nonprofit organization that kind of came of age as I was still playing, that I now serve on the board for, called Son of a Saint. It's relationships like those that kind of stand the test of time. And I live in New Jersey now, but being on the board at Son of a Saint, which is really serving the greater New Orleans area, you just don't get relationships like that overnight. Those are things that kind of build organically. So just really enjoyed that decade in the city and just met some really good people, and luckily, fortunate enough to have a lot of those relationships still intact.
Yeah, I mean, New Orleans is such a unique and special city. My mom grew up there. My entire extended family on my mom's side is still there. I was telling you before we started recording, my grandfather was part of the first ever group of Saints season ticket holders back in the 60s. It's just such a unique city. A lot of times I have friends who go for the first time and they come back and they're like, I feel like I just went to a different country. Like, this is just totally something on its own. How do what stood out to you about the city and just living there for a decade, what was special about New Orleans to you as a city?
Man, it was so different. It was so I'm from the Northeast, and that was the first time I had ever been in, I guess what you call the Deep South. And it was just inviting. That was the thing that really stood out the most. They just kind of welcomed me with open arms, and for 10 years I felt like I gained, a lot of new family members. So just the ability to come into a city and not just feel like you're in a city, but feel like you're joining a real community. That was huge. That was huge as somebody that was kind of trying to figure out how to become a pro, to have that built-in support system that I didn't know I needed in a fan base, man, was huge. It was major.
Yeah, I mean, you said it earlier, going to a fun home game in that Superdome is so different from any other professional,
Yeah.
any other NFL game in particular. It feels almost a lot more like a college atmosphere,
Hmm.
where it's so friendly. It's such a party. I think there's definitely nothing like it. I want to transition a little bit, looking back into what you said started when you were still playing with your angel investing. You said your post NFL career started while you were still in the league, in a lot of ways. So, and you've had this focus on sports, whether it was arena football and now, of course, with CVP.
Hmm.
Sports has a ton of momentum as an asset class right now. There are groups like Redbird Capital and Arctos Partners right down the street from where I am in Dallas.
Hmm.
The NFL is now officially allowing private equity ownership into the league. They were the last kind of holdout of the major leagues to do so. Private equity group leader just bought the Celtics a week ago. I mean, it's really happening in terms of capital, not to mention everything happening collegiately with NIL and the portal and collectives. And it's just feels like an absolute earthquake, seismic shifts that are going on. What is it that you think has been driving such dramatic change in the recent past? Everyone has loved sports. And, that's nothing new. Kids grow up loving sports. You remain a fan through adulthood. But what is it that has made this into the gigantic, or maybe supercharged this into the gigantic industry and asset class that it is today?
I think there's a convergence of two major factors at one time. There is, in the investment world, there is this want and need to diversify with alternative investments. And then at the same time, the thing that's opening up the sports world of investment is access, right? You just kind of talked about it a little bit, even within the question. I mean, there's been such a tight lid on these opportunities, and there's been such a small group of people that have gotten access to these opportunities. Access and creating more ways to access these deals is part of what's opening up the landscape. I mean, if you think about the economics on some of these deals, a lot of these owners have been, they bought these teams in, 80, 100 million, $200 million deals at the time. So what they're seeing now is these valuations that are through the roof and into the mid single digit billions. And if you have an investment that you bought into at 200 million and you're the majority owner and you have an opportunity to exit for 6 billion, even if you're selling minority stakes, you're taking some significant chips off the table, and you're able to reinvest in other places, right? So I think a lot of these owners that have gotten in early are in a position where they want to capture some of the upside and maybe go reinvest downstream again. And that's creating some liquidity for those guys, but at the same time, it's creating, small doors for people to come in, and be able to play and invest in some of these properties. So I think that is what's happening at the very highest levels. But I think you're also seeing that the value chain of sports is becoming more valuable. Um, the more that sports, the more that media and technology get integrated in with the sports value, the more you're going to start to see, people find different entry points into it, right? So for a long time, sports was just about the game itself, right? It was about the game itself, the merchandise, and the TV rights. But even as you're seeing the TV rights change, and the way that the delivery of those TV rights are changing, and you're seeing the Netflixes of the worlds, the Amazons of the worlds come in. You're seeing these different fan engagement technologies that are driving efficiency, and are driving transactions even outside the venue. So I think the more that technology and media evolve within sports, it just creates more open doors. And I don't think this wave is going to stop. I think we're just at the tip of the spear, to be honest. You're going to see more of these emerging leagues, I think, pop up and start to create some noise. You're going to see more of these even these legacy leagues start to adopt more modern technology, more streaming, more fan engagement technology. So I think the scope is really growing at a time where access is opening up, and that's what makes it really exciting for us, as a firm, to be a part of this movement.
Yeah, and it also feels like when attention is such a hot commodity and such an impossible thing to get from people,
Mm-hmm.
as everyone's attention span just dwindles over time. But sports, you never are aware of what's going to happen on the field. So if that remains that kind of top of funnel entry point to get
Mm-hmm.
people's eyeballs, to get people's dollars, to get them in the door, you can imagine the long list and kind of long tail of companies and opportunities and products that can be offered there. And I mean, the spectacle via the new types of media and the actual tech that's integrated into a lot of these sports. You look at something as simple as there's COSM here in Dallas, which is basically like watching a game or a NASCAR race at the Sphere.
Right.
There is, the TGL, this league that would not have been possible without this unbelievable technology and tracking and data collection, and that it was reliable enough that you could actually create a from scratch experience of indoor golf with professional players with reliable technology for that to actually be broadcasted live, and you're not worried about a bunch of technical difficulties. So I think that the magic of sports and the uncertainty that comes with the sporting event and the incredible athletes that are actually making it happen, that seems to be just this differentiation for the entire category that just sets it apart so much.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think, we've gotten to a point where the game itself is kind of the tip of the spear.
Right.
Right. And, I think the more that we realize that sports is not just competing against other leagues, sports is competing against the movie theater, sports is competing against Netflix. It's really a battle for attention. And, we've seen sports kind of evolve and adapt to where the game is still going on, but even the ability to integrate the parlay betting, to be able to integrate the, in-game fantasy stuff, to where even as that attention span is getting shorter and shorter, leagues and teams are getting to a point where they're able to personalize the experience at a fan level, and they're also able to, kind of make room for some of those attention grabbing pieces, to where you can augment the game experience real time, to where people are used to gamified experiences. Now you're seeing more of that, embedded into the sporting experience itself. So, I think sports as a whole has done a good job of kind of skating to where the puck is going, and making sure that once you've captured that fan attention, you're keeping it. And then you're building that brand equity, even, outside of the venue, outside of the, in the off seasons. And, I think just that pairing is going to be interesting to continue to watch as this thing continues to evolve.
And so for anyone who might not understand what you mean when you say value chain within that whole broad category of sports, talk a little bit about what you mean from one end of the spectrum to the other, ranging from, leagues and venues all the way to these consumer applications on the fan consumption side. And as a second part to that question, talk a little bit about how CVP looks at those from maybe, without any specifics, check size, right? Because some of these are like, you just want to get some skin in the game, you want to get an allocation, whereas other ones, you're like, we're basically seed investing in what we think is a completely new technology, completely new opportunity that's going to define the way that fans consume sports or that athletes prepare for their sport. Just talk a little bit about that, shine some light there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the easiest way to think about the value chain of sports is to put yourself in the perspective of a fan, right? And if you've ever been to a game, just walk through every part of the experience where you have to reach in your pocket and spend some dollars, right? That's the value chain of sports, right? So when you park, that's part of the value chain, the parking in and around the venue. Obviously, the ticketing components of it. The more that we can get, the more that these teams and leagues are going to more of a digital ticket option, that creates the opportunity for maybe digital wallets, right? So that's a part of the value chain. How are you actually purchasing the tickets? How are you scanning the tickets? How are you using these tickets to maybe create, alternative experiences for fans at different ticketing levels? Once you get into the venue, obviously the seating, the concessions experience is now, part of the value chain. You're seeing a lot of these teams and venues go from the traditional concession stands where people are waiting in line to in-seat concessions. There's technology behind that. That's part of the value chain. So as you just kind of work your way through the fan experience, and every time that you either swipe your card or reach in your pocket and grab your wallet, that becomes part of the value chain. So really anywhere that you can kind of track the digital dollar or track the footprint of a dollar is where we're looking to invest, partially because one, we mentioned it earlier, these team valuations are going through the roof, and the ability to invest in one of the big five leagues, those opportunities just don't come around very often. And when they do, the price tag on it is so high that it becomes price prohibitive to get involved. So as we look at kind of finding our way through building a portfolio that one is a smart portfolio and kind of connects with the portfolio company next to it, but also kind of creates intrinsic value that raises the high tide for all boats or all portfolio companies. Those value chain investments for us become really interesting ways to not just get involved in technology or get involved in emerging technology, but also be in position to refine it, optimize it, and then be able to sell it into other venues, other teams, and other leagues.
Right.
So, the right investment for us becomes, a scale factor that we can sell into other organizations, other venues, other teams, leagues, so that we're always creating a portfolio that has scalability, doesn't just have revenue, it has quality revenue and valuable revenue that you can sustainably scale. So when we talk about value chain, it's really as simple as putting yourself in the fan's shoes, and anytime that you have to swipe or anytime that you have to come out of pocket, that's a part of what we want access to, because outside of just the investment and the innovation itself, there's a lot of data in those transactions that make the venue smarter, that make the fan experience smarter and better, make the team experience smarter and better. And we genuinely feel like the groups that are able to kind of stay ahead of the curve and ahead of the trend on fan experience and personalizing it for the fan, those are going to be the groups that win.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly makes sense that you're kind of part of the strategic value prop of CVP is that you are specifically seeking out businesses that, as you bring them into the fold of CVP, into the tent, they are immediately complementary of the other businesses that you've already deployed capital into. And one thing that I'd love for you to just, at least at a high level, touch on is that CVP is, and it says it on the website, and is advertised as a holding company versus a typical fund. There are a lot of differences that come with that. One of which being that you are not constrained on you do not have the typical time constraint of 7 to 10 years of a hard kind of cutoff that a typical venture fund would have. But talk a little bit about why that's the structure you've chosen and what comes along with that categorization.
Yeah, I mean, as a holding company, we're what's classified as permanent capital, and what that means is to the point you just made, we're not in a mode where we have to chase exits in 5 to 7 to 10 years. So we can invest in growth stage companies, and really be hands-on in creating the value add within those companies, and really take a more patient approach, which it changes the metrics for us. It changes the type of company that we look to invest in, and that's why that quality of revenue becomes a really great identifier for us. But yeah, it puts us in a position where, one, we don't charge, a typical fund would charge a 20% carried interest on the profits, and at the end of the day, right? So as the fund winds down, the fund comes to a close, the general partners would typically take 20% of the profits off the top and then share the 80% of the profits with the LPs in the fund. With our structure, we don't have that carried interest. We don't have that time horizon. So it allows us to be strategic. It allows us to be, real value add contributors to the portfolio, but it also allows us to invest along a longer time horizon to where we can be very strategic in how we put the portfolio together, how we construct the portfolio. So to your point around, making sure that it becomes complementary, it allows those companies an opportunity to grow and mature at a pace that is scalable and sustainable, not just one that gets us to the finish line so that we can exit and get paid as GPs, right? So there's an element of alignment that comes with that, that we think aligns really well with sport and the sporting ecosystem, because these have been traditionally long-term plays, right? The plays that we talked about, the Celtics transaction, some of the NFL transactions, the NBA transactions, these aren't 5-7 year turnarounds. Like these are longer term plays. These are longer term value plays. And that evergreen structure, that holding company structure, allows us to align, our thesis, our thought process, our model with what has traditionally been a longer term value play.
Yeah, no, with the teams and like you mentioned, the actual sales of the clubs themselves, the Celtics example, among many others, it's so interesting that only 20, 30 years ago, buying a sports team was reserved for like billionaires who wanted either a trophy asset to brag to their friends about, or maybe a tax loophole. I don't think they were looking at it. I don't think they were looking at it as, something that was going to generate 20x returns, or a lot more in some cases, just a decade or two down the road. So that's clearly been a serious shift, and you can see why the private equity minds now have their fingers all over it. But what I wanted to ask was a little bit about perception and what you experienced going out. This is an ambitious, to call it a project is a joke. It's way more than that. But this is an ambitious thing that you set out to do in building CVP. So how were you perceived as an ex-athlete? I'm sure there are some benefits. Maybe more people were willing to take your call. But did you also face some skepticism? How did that go?
Yeah, it's been a journey of, I'll call it 3 different chapters, right? So I'll start at the first chapter, which was, getting involved in VC in the first place, as a younger player. That was a chapter where I was kind of in the mascot mode, right? I was getting involved. I was getting invited to these rooms. I thought I was going in to do one thing and actually talk about business. I was really there to just like talk about football and just kind of be a representative of the athlete community. And, starting out that way, it's tough to try to feel like you're being taken seriously. I like to feel like I had enough self-awareness to know that there was a lot that I had to learn, and there was a learning curve that I had to kind of master through the process. But early on, you kind of got the feeling that no matter what certifications you got, no matter what experience you had, you were always going to be seen as an athlete. So chapter 2 for me was kind of getting out of VC, getting out of that world. And really, this was right around 2020-ish. I kind of just walked completely away from VC, walked completely away from sports, went and got my financial licenses, got my Series 66, my Series 7. And I was working as a financial advisor, representing and working with athletes and entertainers. And that was a chapter where, I didn't like how the first chapter played out. So it was a chapter where I went and made sure that I built some foundational skills, right? Um, Obviously the work that I'd done in the VC world, the work that I had done as a value add investor, I'd built some skills as a business person, a consultant, and as an entrepreneur. But building those financial skill sets to kind of marry those up, in that 3-year time period where I was financial advising and I was doing some executive coaching as well, those gave me some foundational skills to where now, as I'm in this third chapter launching CVP, I know who I am. I know what I used to do and did it at a high level playing football. But I also have these foundational skills that I've built over time to where now entering into a room, there's only a certain number of roles that I'm willing to play. And I feel like I've built enough of a track record. I've built enough of a skill set to be selective and be strategic and not go back to that mascot role. Right. So there are still going to be some roles, some rooms that I walk in that are only going to see me as the former athlete. And, I'm at a point in my life and my career now where I don't have to stay in those rooms. Right. So I'm moving and I'm navigating to the places where I don't need to be admired. I just need to be respected for the work and the track record. And if there's a mutual respect, then I'm willing to walk into any room and try to create value.
And we actually met at an event in Austin about seven months ago with a group called PAC, the Pro Athlete Community. Chip Povsek has started it. And it's really, he puts on business combines specifically with the goal of educating current and former athletes, professional athletes, and kind of helping them navigate the transition into the business world and understand, look, if you want to go into franchising or venture, or you want to buy a bunch of gyms or media or whatever, there are a lot of things that you need to know. Here are a few, landmines not to step on. And you gave a great talk at that event. I do wonder, what is your feel right now of, broadly, how do current and I guess more recently retired NFL players, do you feel that the average person has a grip on what they need to do to succeed financially once the peak of their earning potential, as far as a salary and an earning perspective, is behind them, maybe transitioning from kind of going from being an earner to an owner and allowing themselves to actually get equity in high upside businesses and actually, reap the fruits of some investments that they made in their 20s and 30s, 10, 15 years down the line? How do you think that the average person thinks about it? Do you think there's still a big gap there?
Yeah, I think there's a huge gap there. And I think, groups like PAC are doing a really good job of filling that void, because you just kind of got to take a stepwise approach, right? So from the athlete perspective, the first thing you got to realize is that these careers are short moments in time in a longer life, right? So I was fortunate and blessed enough to play 10 years. That's 3 times the average. But when I retired, I was still 32 years old, right? So the biggest challenge becomes you walk away from this earning potential and this high earning income, and it's very tough to replace that income in any job. I don't care where you go, what industry you go. It's going to be really hard to replace your salary as a professional athlete.
Yeah.
Right. So right off the jump, you have to right size your lifestyle to where the puck is going in terms of your earning potential, even if you do everything right. The other big challenge is that the financial services world is not really set up to kind of foster the kind of education and the relationship with money that a young 23 to 25-year-old kid, at the end of the day, those decisions that come with that lifestyle and that moment in time, like those are decisions that, dictate 50, 60 years from now, dictate the next generation. And just from my experience inside financial services, it is not a world that's set up for athletes to win long term, in that, it's still very much a stocks and bonds driven industry, right? Because people get paid off of assets under management. I'm going to keep you in the assets that pay my brokerage firm, so they pay me. And as a 25, 26-year-old person, you probably, should be in more alternative investments. You have much more of an appetite for risk because you have time on your side.
Right.
That's a place and time where you probably should be taking, more bets into alternative investments. And the financial services world is just not set up to do that. So there's a lot of misalignments along the way, even the people that you hire to help you, which makes it more challenging for an athlete or someone, even just any young person in general that comes into this waterfall of wealth. Same is true for a young entrepreneur that exits, right? it's just very hard to try and right size the experience, right size the team. And when you're somebody that doesn't have the experience and expertise in the kind of the long-term vision, and you probably don't have a lot of people around you that understand the long-term vision, you're laser focused on trying to maintain this thing that is creating this income and hoping that the people that you hire are equipped to, drive it to the drive it for the long term. And traditionally that just hasn't been the case. So there are some challenges, some misalignments. But groups like PAC are, putting more empowerment back into the players' hands by creating these platforms and creating these opportunities to come in and learn, so that, from my perspective, the goal for an athlete is to get closer and closer to the driver's seat of your own financial journey as you go. You don't want to rush it, but you also don't ever want to be in a position where you feel fully dependent upon somebody else for your livelihood. So there's this balancing act of, how do I learn the skill sets? How do I learn to take over more and more of my portfolio, more of my life as I go along, in a mode where I can always continue to stay focused on the main thing, which is creating this income and this waterfall in the first place. So it's always going to be a balancing act.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like the tide is turning. I think that the young guys, from what you see out there, are hungry to better equip themselves and learn about this type of stuff. And it's good that there are older kind of ambassadors like yourself helping with that. It's also funny imagining, like you said, about the earning potential. You leave the NFL, you go to your first, job interview for your first non-NFL career. It's like, what are your salary expectations? Well, based on my last role, I'm going to need $13 million a year. That's kind of a rough ask in the non-professional athlete world. I know that we are up against time. I want to do a quick 1 minute lightning round, and we'll get you out of here if you have a moment.
Got you.
Okay. So we're just going to rattle these off. You can go one word, one sentence, just whatever comes to mind. Sound good?
Let's do it.
All right. Best football leader you've ever been around?
Drew Brees is too obvious. We'll go John Vilma.
Jonathan Vilma. I like it. Do you have a business mentor?
Man, I can't say I have one mentor, but I do have a lot of mentors in different areas. There's a gentleman named Cliff Shore that I met through Columbia Business School, who has become a mentor and friend, and he's at the very top of the list.
I know CVP is looking at emerging leagues. What's one that has your attention?
We'll go recency bias. I just saw yesterday that the NFL is looking to platform flag football, which is really interesting moving forward, especially with the Olympics coming up.
Agreed. All right, looking back into the time in which you were in the league, the late 2000s, early 2010s, I want to get to your opinion on a couple things. Andre Johnson or Anquan Boldin?
Oof, man, I'm gonna go Anquan just because he was one of the original big guys that play in the slot, and that's where I made my living. So I'll go Anquan.
Ben Roethlisberger or Phillip Rivers?
I'm gonna go Phillip. Phillip can sling it.
He can sling it. He can shot put it. Sling
Yeah.
it. One word to describe Sean Payton.
Intense, especially with his juicy fruit.
Yeah. Who was an unsung hero with the Saints during your decade in New Orleans?
Pierre Thomas. Truly underrated. Hell of a running back.
What was your favorite place to eat in New Orleans?
That's a trick question, man. They had me on a weight limit. I couldn't really eat like that, man.
When you go back, when you've been back for your board meeting, where do you like to go for a nice meal? How about that? You like Clancy's? You like Commander's? You like any of those places?
I like Commanders. I always end up at Desi Vegas. Desi, that's my guy. So I go Desi Vegas.
All right, this is a question I like to ask everyone. It's kind of a two-parter. Who's the biggest freak athlete you ever played with or against during your time in the NFL? Julius
Peppers, by far.
I saw Julius Peppers at a dinner in Vegas in December, and I've never seen someone physically built like him. He's like his dimensions he doesn't look like a human.
It's crazy. You should see him moving on the field trying to run away from him. It's crazy.
I shook his hand and I felt like I was shaking a baseball mitt. It was insane.
No, he was a hell of an athlete.
And then my favorite, the flip side of that question, who comes to mind when you think sneaky athlete during your time in the NFL?
I'll go back to Drew. Because everyone thinks that Drew is the cerebral quarterback, and he is he is, no doubt. But he is a really solid athlete just across the board. Tennis, basketball, you name it, he can do it.
I know he's a big pickleball guy now.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Well, that's Marques Colston. Thank you so much. Let people know, please, where they can check out, get some information on CVP.
Yeah, you can check us out on our website is championventurepartners.com. We're also pretty active on LinkedIn, and you can find us on Instagram at CVP Invest.
All right. I love it. Thank you so much for taking the time.
I appreciate you, Brent.